So it's a little bit awkward, the whole kind of let's be in the dark and show slides and I'll walk around, or I won't walk around, or I'll get a laser pointer and point around if I do that. Because it's all a little bit like here's me doing something and there's you doing something, and in a way quite quickly we're going to have to turn this round and you're going to have to ask me questions, because one of the things about what I do is that it's all a big kind of question. What do you do? So the way I might start this is to say I go to a party, I meet someone who I've never met before, I introduce myself, they say what do you do? I say I'm an artist, and they go, oh, so what material do you work in? And I kind of go, well, I'm not sure. And they start looking a little bit like a little worried that they might have asked the wrong question. And I start looking a little kind of awkward and weird, because in theory, I've told them I'm an artist, so I should know what that is. Or maybe the question is then, so what kind of art do you make? And it's like, again, it's quite a long answer, and depending on who it is, I have to kind of take a little rain check and see if they've got a little bit of time to have a bit of a listen to what I do. And if we go right back to where it kind of, if I again try and figure out where I started out. I mean, there was no. People ask me, was there any kind of moment in your life when you decided you wanted to be an artist? And I think that happens to people. I think that people get to a point or have a kind of a moment in their life where they see something or something happens, they get energized and they go, I'd really like to be an artist, or I'd like to follow this kind of line of thought. And for me, it really didn't happen. I think that I've kind of totally drifted into being someone standing here saying I'm an artist. But basically what happened was that I went on a foundation course in 1985, and I bet you've probably all done foundation courses. You do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You do graphics, 3D. You do all the different kind of art-related things. Maybe in the first, I think in our case it was in the first 2 terms, and then in the third term, it's gone off.
Is it really right on?
It's gone off. I can hear.
No, we can't hear you. Is it really on?
No, it's not.
Batteries are in the top.
Right, we're going to have a battery change.
Look down to the corner. But,
I know where I was. It's okay.
yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you'll be fine. Don't worry. We've done this before. We don't want to have any repeat.
Press the button, please. I will hold it. Okay, right. Is that on now? Hello?
Yeah.
Right, okay, so we're back. I mean, it sounded fine, but I could hear what I was saying. But anyway, apparently this is what happened last week. Anyway, so don't want any more of that. So, I'm on foundation. I've done 2 terms, and we've done a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then basically there's a special day where the head of the year, the head of foundation, comes up to the studio where everyone's assembled and says all the people that want to do graphics go to the graphics department, fashion department, textiles, 3D design, illustration, and everyone disappeared. And then there was those that were left, We met at lunchtime afterwards, and people were going, "So are you doing fine art then?" And we were like, "Well, I guess so." I think we just didn't make any decisions as to like specifying what it was that we were doing. So we're just sort of doing the art bit, what was left over in a way. And it's almost like that kind of created a whole kind of, I suppose, like a pattern in the way that it works. I did obviously then find myself continuing on a course of studying fine art, because I think I was curious about what it was, and I thought that if I spent some time and went to art school, I would be able to understand what I liked and didn't like about art. It was quite simple, really, at that point. I think it was simply like, I don't really understand this. I think I'm interested, but I'm not really sure. So maybe if I study it, I can then make easy and clear decisions about what I like and what I don't like, and it will be easy. Unfortunately, it was never really like that, and I think what I learned was essentially that actually it's much more sophisticated in terms of what you like and what you don't like. Of course, it relates to your subjectivity, but it actually is really like, you know, it relates to your objectivity, but it also actually like is just an incredibly, endlessly subjective experience where something that you see 1 year, maybe 2 years later, you might kind of come about understanding it, or you might kind of realise what it is, or it might have some meaning for you. And so it's a very difficult thing to kind of study because it doesn't follow the standard process of understanding. It's not straightforward. It doesn't quite work in the way that other things that you might come across work. So I'm going to leap straight in with the first image, which is hopefully going to do this. So this is basically, I'm still at the Royal College, and this is 1990, and I'm trying very hard to figure out, again, like this idea of authenticity or signature, or what is, in a way, what are the kind of terms of art? Like when we go to a gallery, we quite often see work in terms of signature. We would go into a gallery and we'd go, oh, there's a Miro, or there's a Picasso, or we would recognise the artist almost like because the art itself started to have kind of signature styles. And in a way, this becomes the whole kind of, the whole philosophy of contemporary, or modern art, if you like. So if we want to think of modern art as coming from the moment when Velasquez puts himself into a picture, and he's there painting. It's a painting of him painting the King and Queen, but the painting is him standing next to the King and Queen's daughter painting. And what he does is he puts himself into the frame, and seemingly from that point on, artists are kind of fated with this idea that there's a kind of communication with the artist through the artwork. That in a way, all art is a kind of self-portrait process. And so even if we talk about, even if we think about art, people that say, I just make the art for myself, I think they're making the art for themselves, but the other self that they have, the kind of couched person outside of their self. So here, why I think this is quite interesting to stick this in here as well, is that actually this was an environmental painting. At the time, there were things like organisations like the Body Shop, which were trying to make people aware of the world in terms of what it might be able to offer you, sort of holistically. There was a sort of idea of globalisation, but it was and this idea of consuming, but the idea of kind of consuming the sort of delights of the world, or maybe even parts of the rainforest that were able to bring special benefits that were natural, that somehow embraced nature. And the idea of the body shop was to embrace nature rather than embracing science, or what was until around that moment, there was definitely a kind of sense that people wanted science to do everything for them. They wanted science to clean them and science to kind of stop them from smelling or keep their cell structure in the right places. And so with this painting, what we've got is we've got turning it the wrong way. In the corner there, you see, I'm going to use the pointer, this thing here. So it becomes a kind of signature in itself. Is this thing which I sewed by me. It says support, recycled wood. Blah 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 blah. Anyway, I'm not going to read it. But anyway, what it says is that I did everything I could to try and take as little from the kind of planet or resources. Everything was recycled and everything was made using replenishables, and I planted a tree. And basically, it all kind of comes from plants. Again, like the title of the work, was again this sort of thinking about the title of an artwork. The artworks have titles, and then obviously the title as in this business of the artist's signature. So at this time, this is someone who's they're still at their university, and they have no reputation at all. They really have no audience, but they're trying to work with the idea of predicted audience, or they're trying to work with the idea of, I think at this moment I'm trying to be critical of the idea of signature. I'm trying to sort of suggest that art is seen through signature, so much so that it obscures actually what's being seen. That maybe certain artworks by certain artists are actually seen before they're seen. So it's the beginning of me thinking about the idea of the way that people have these preconceptions of what art is, and those preconceptions almost like define like how people are able to see art, or what they might be finding in art, or how they might be moving through their artistic knowledge. So then, after this, I made this very infamous work, which was simply an empty studio, my empty studio at the Royal College of Art, with a blue plaque placed at the back of the studio. This is what the plaque said, and that year, the rector of the Royal College, Justin Stevens, had been appointed as the head of English Heritage, and it was unknown to me. And he'd gone to the Royal College with his new English Heritage friends, and they'd sort of gone, "Oh, Joshua, what's this?" And he thought that I'd found out something about what he was going on to do, and he hadn't told anyone at the Royal College that was what he was going to do. And he thought that it was simply a personal jibe against him. And so I was actually failed my MA on the basis of this artwork. But strangely enough, it had really, and maybe he knew it, but it had the sort of opposite effect. As a sort of failed sculpture, it kind of strangely pushed me into a quite an important space. Suddenly, like, I managed to get like an article in the Telegraph, an article in the Times. It was mentioned in Time Out. So suddenly, and then there was a feature in the first edition of Freeze art magazine. So from sort of obscurity to sort of some sort of renown. But it also was interesting because it was about the fact that I'd failed my degree. So suddenly, what I learned as well with this whole scenario was that the story of the art, and almost like outside of the art, because we can go on about René Magritte and kind of like the death of the author, and we can talk quite sort of like, we can go down and drill down into details of how this might be functioning on a sort of artistic level, but if it's simply like on a story level, he failed his degree because he made this work. That people might sort of, it brings people into kind of contact with the work. Also, there's not very much to it. It's a blue plaque which actually has got my name on it as well. You know, it's actually there is no such thing as Borough of Kingston. It's Borough of Kingston and Chelsea, but it didn't look so good. I sort of slightly corrupted it. I made this work pop later on, and again, I'm still thinking about this idea of the self-portrait. I'm thinking about the idea of culture. I'm thinking about the idea of tourism, of in a way like the frames of reference. How does an artwork function in terms of its cultural positioning? Like that an artist coming from the UK, a male artist coming from the UK. Some of the preconceptions about cultural identity might be present in the way that people think about, or come to think about, or come to understand the work of art, what they're looking at. Here I've chosen Madame Tussauds as the most important kind of touristic, cultural feature of London. The punk movement. What's punk? Well, again, like punk is a kind of hugely UK-based kind of phenomena, and again, very touristic at this point in 1993. Camden is full of Japanese tourists who are all buying punk memorabilia. What's punk? Well, possibly it's the Sex Pistols. What's the Sex Pistols? Well, possibly it's Sid Vicious. So here I am, Sid Vicious, and again, I noticed that Sid was doing an impersonation of someone else. He's impersonating Elvis. He's got his collar turned up. He spikes his hair. He's got a gun. He's got Nancy's guns, which looks really similar to the dagger holster that Elvis Presley is wearing in a piece which is repeated over and over by Andy Warhol. And also the photograph of Elvis Presley is taken down in when you look down the top of the camera, I forget what it's called, a box camera. So I could put the work up higher, so basically you meet the work right at sort of like at waist level. So this is the kind of thing that happened where, and also I think that I was thinking very much about sort of popular art and art that was art again, like that was peripheral, that was part of a frame, if you like. And I think that lots of art that I make deals with this idea of the frame, trying to find the thing at the outside, the thing that starts, the moment at which something starts to turn into something else. And part of that, and part of what I'm using, again, is art historical reference. Is part of it is using art history as a kind of material, as a kind of thing in the work. So the death of Marat, again, very much like going back to this is there have been a few waxwork iterations between this one and this one, but here we've like the gun has gone. It's now just a finger. I've fallen back. I cut my ear when I was shaving. There's a kind of Ian Hamilton Finlay piece there now, rather than something that says Marat. And I'm now sort of in this again revolutionary. It's about the revolutionary. So again, the revolutionary is the figure that kind of defines what cultural identity is. This is based on a Magritte painting, and it's a painting from the Vache series of Magritte, and it's sort of like the moment when Magritte starts to try and get outside of Magritte, and he starts painting what refers to as surrealism in the bright sunlight, and it's very loose and free, and he has a large show of these Vache paintings, and they're a terrible shock to everyone, and everyone hates them, and so he has to basically return to the bad good old older Magritte. But anyway, so now this is a sculpture, and originally it starts off with a sculpture of my face and my head, and then kind of has all this stuff put on it. This is a bronze cast of a cardboard box, painted back to look like a cardboard box. And again, I was sort of inspired by Andy Warhol's Brillo boxes, but now we've got this totally de-symbolised, or the box, it's just the box that has no logos on it. And in a way, one of the things as a container that it does, and its blandness, is that it attempts to talk about something that we can't see. So it's almost like in and of itself, it's a trompe-l'oeil. It is a trompe-l'oeil. It fools you into thinking that it's a box, but also it fools you into thinking that maybe the box is just a simple container of something inside the box. So it starts to kind of try to undermine our preconceptions of when we go into a gallery, what we're looking at, or how we're looking. And one of the enjoyable things about seeing this work, when it's on show, is that the second person who enters the room almost has the privilege of being able to see someone bending down looking at a cardboard box. And so what that does is that actually kind of helps to kind of agenda the performance of looking at art and the performance of taking part in looking at art as art in itself, or as a performance in itself. And again, dealing with this sense of how art, or one of the jobs that art has, to try to question people's idea of what's real, or what makes up them. What is it to be? Who am I? What am I? A bronze cast of a sleeping bag, painted to look like a sleeping bag with a figure in it. Again, this is the liminal space. This is the guy that lives on the street, so the homeless guy. So the homeless guy is he's a bit like the revolutionary. He's a bit like the punk, the dead punk. It's the idea of this sort of liminal kind of frame. It's what starts to define what's inside and what's outside in terms of acceptability or not acceptability. A figure in a sleeping bag, if you actually put that in a doorway, is and the first time I showed this work, I actually showed it outside in the doorway, and it was absolutely fantastic, because what I realised more and more was that when you have a sculpture like this, which is a figure in a sleeping bag, people don't want to look at it, because if they look at it, then they almost, like by seeing it, they engage and become aware that someone is sleeping there. And if they're aware and engage with someone sleeping there, then they have to kind of deal with the responsibility of someone sleeping there. So they have to consciously walk past it. So there's this wonderful tension of wanting to look and not wanting to look, because also people, almost like it's human nature to be interested and to be fascinated by how people live and by how other people live. So it's absolutely fascinating. There's a sort of morbid curiosity with the idea of someone being caught out of place and being in a sleeping bag, sleeping on the streets. And then the idea that it's just simply this form, that it's just simply this kind of like, again, hidden form. The idea of hidden form, but again, it's this hidden element, but the hidden element is removed and then removed again by virtue of being part of this trompe-l'oeil scenario, trompe-l'oeil setup. This is probably my most famous work, and if I have trouble with the person at the party, what do you do? And what's your work like? I say, well, one of my greatest works is I took a filled bin bag, a black bin bag, and I cast it into bronze, and I painted it back to look like a bin bag. And that generally does the trick. Either they then move on to someone else at the party, or they want to carry on and sort of go, why did you do that? What's that for? They want to ask more questions. This is a bronze cast of a pillow with this wonderful, I think this is the first non-plain linen set. And this is actually acquired from my grandmother, who has this wonderful, I don't know whether it comes from Heels or Habitat or something like that, this Neapolitan stripe. It was like the first kind of racy linen. This was like, you know, breaking out from plain linen. So this is the first kind of like sort of post the Second World War moment of kind of celebration. And I like the idea of it being a sort of a kind of stripy painting, or a kind of Daniel Buren type of kind of thing, where you've got this canvas and then you've got these stripes on it. Okay, now I've got a little film here. It's called The Mechanical Turk. We're going to totally run out of time if I keep going like this, but I'm just going to put this on. So originally I was going to make it as a waxwork sculpture, and I can't hear it at all. There is a sound. It's not very loud. Jane's moving around. I mean, it literally is the sound. I can almost do it. I can almost do it from up here. It goes, yeah. That's me doing it, not the sound. No. So originally I was going to make this so I'll give the game away and tell you what happens. The figure does something which is called the Knight Tour. It takes the horse piece and it moves the horse piece around all 64 squares of the board and does it like on each one, and then returns back to where it started. And that is a move apparently that the original mechanical sculpture, the Mechanical Turk, that was made in the 1860s by this guy Wolfgang von Kempen, which apparently was the thing that fueled people's idea for computers. And in theory, there is actually like part of the computer networks called the Mechanical Turk now, which you can actually use on your computer. And what it does is it takes your computer to a room full of people who can answer your data questions, because obviously people are going to be able to process information in a slightly different way to the algorithms. But basically the Mechanical Turk was an illusion. The machine itself lasted, I think, into the 1920s. It went to America. It was written about by Edgar Allan Poe. It fascinated the courts of Europe. It toured around. It actually was it had a miniature chess-playing master inside it who would operate the levers from underneath. But obviously, for me, in my terms, I've got the idea of it being a Turk, which is interesting to me. I've got the idea of it being a chess player, which is obviously a Duchampian reference. We have also got perhaps the Ian Hamilton Finlay being kind of reproduced here. And then the pipe, this is a pipe here as well, which again gives me all these kind of inclusive things. And originally I had planned to make it as a sculpture, to make it as a carved wooden mechanical sculpture. But then I realised actually like there had been one of these things made. Not that necessarily stops me. Most of the time that doesn't actually stop me. But it ended up just as a film piece. So I've just shown you a bit of it. And so what happens as well as a film piece, obviously it loops around, so it's able to go through 64 places and then comes back to where it starts and then carries on. And it's a kind of a performance artwork with me staring out of the screen, and I'm actually looking at an overhead projection of the board, so with a map, so that I can see where my hand is going. I'll show you a little. I'll show you a little bit more. Oh no, I'm not. I'm not going to show you a little bit more. I was kidding, but I'm not now. I'm going to show you something else. So this is a massive jump cut, but anyway, But the candle, maybe we can stick with the candle. The candle kind of, possibly we can talk about the candle at the end as well. This sculpture, dumb candle, it literally is like the end of a broom handle in the studio, and I just cut the broom handle off and I carved down the top, and then left a little stalk standing, painted it black. Dumb candle. It was actually selected for the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, and it won the Charles Wollaston Prize for Sculpture. So it's a prize-winning sculpture, and I was handed a cheque for £24,000 by Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen, and I said, "Oh, I thought it was going to be a big cheque," and everyone went, "What?" And I was like, "No, one of those big cheques, you know, like you get those big cheques." I mean, it was big, yeah, it's okay. Anyway, so that's the dumb candle. Like, so again, like we're still fiddling and playing with this idea of the. It's to do again with the titles of things. It's to do with the status of things. It's to do with the reference of things, and then it's to do with kind of sliding things that maybe don't and wouldn't ordinarily live together or exist together, and putting those things together. And it's really like, for me, it's something that art has the possibility of doing. It allows you to kind of enter into a whole kind of sea of thoughts and ideas, all at the same time, or all in the same object. And that's, you know, far superior to me than me standing here sort of like doing this, flicking through these things. Somebody's son, again, like I've still got a gun, I've got sort of spiky hair, I'm still a tourist attraction, I'm still a waxwork, and again, I through my career, I've been very kind of like partially kind of I've invested time in the idea of the military, right? So this idea with the process with the gun, this idea of the military, or the idea of war, and how war is this idea of kind of cultural exercise. Like our culture is so important and so good and so correct, that we will need to go and kill other people in order to enforce the fact that it survives. Again, a sort of Warholian image, but again, it's me as Che Guevara. This is 2005, and the only reason I'm saying it's 2005 is because, again, like suddenly when I go through all this work, I start thinking like the computer now has had such an effect on the way I see everything now, and obviously at this point in 2005, like it really it wasn't the case that I mean, now it is the case that everybody's being photoshopped as everybody else, and it's pretty normal. But this was really like the beginning of this business of kind of like everybody being anybody, and this idea that anybody could be anybody. And I suppose in itself and of itself, it's a sort of synthetic version of Andy Warhol's "Everybody Will Be Famous for 15 Minutes." It's a kind of a sort of a strange look at the way that media and the way that imagery can be twisted and shifted. Also, like this particular image of Che Guevara, I was particularly captured by it. It seemed to be one of the important images of the 20th century. An image, just a momentary picture taken by Alberto Corda, that became the lasting image of Che Guevara. In fact, it's almost like you show the picture of Che Guevara, and it's almost like shorthand for revolution. And as an image, what I really liked as well about it is that the more distressed it is, the more broken it is, the more used the image is, the more authentic it becomes. So if you've got a t-shirt and it's really washed out and you can only just about make it out, it's the most authentic. So authenticity in this case is coming from use, it's coming from disintegration, it's coming from this idea of things breaking down. So it's camouflage, there's that guy. This is a tapestry which is made of crushed crushed stuff that you can buy in a garage, and so it's all sorts of consumables that you can buy in a garage, and after they've been bought in the garage, then they get thrown out of the car window, and then another car comes along and runs over them. So they're kind of flattened rubbish, consumerist rubbish, and then what happens is they get, I'm afraid I don't have a picture of the close-up of this, but this is actually made as a tapestry. So it's quite a large piece. It's actually more or less as large as it is on the screen here. But actually, when you go close to it, each colour is like a woven. Each pixel, if you like, is like a woven thing. Woven thing. A bronze cast of a pavement, painted to look like the pavement, as a kind of Carl Andre work. Maybe it's a kind of a 1968 kind of idea about kind of underneath the pavement, the beach, or it's about the flaneur. It's sort of about, like, again, maybe it's the place where the nomad is. I quite like the little inclusion of these signature chewing gums. I've done various other work with chewing gums. This is a kind of an urban fire. There's bricks, there's the remnants of the museum here, there's some bits of moulding, and it's actually, again, a bronze cast and then painted back to look like a fire. They like making this in the foundry because obviously they're using molten metal and fire to melt and to smelt the bronze and then turn it back into a fire. They appreciate the kind of irony there. This is a work that's called En Face. There's a little film for this one as well, which I'm going to quickly, because we're going to people run out of time. And now I'm going to forward it a little bit. And there's a funny little jump where you're just going to have to bet the sound goes a bit funny. So basically, what's happening here is I make a series of clay heads. In fact, this is Matt finishing this one. So I make 100 of these wet clay heads, and then I organise a party, which is called the Bust Party, and people who come to the party dressed up, they're invited to model work on these wet clay heads. Filming and sculpting there as well.
You know that as well, like someone else is going to have a go at it as well.
And commentating as well.
You can't just dominate one piece.
The foot fell on the foot. So that was kind of fun, and so that basically, like, the process there was really like just sort of like trying to figure out if there was a way that you could kind of relinquish the responsibility, or that you could make a framework, and then you just invite people to kind of experiment in that framework, and literally just by virtue of making a framework, and certainly because I'm kind of starting off, I mean, it's quite interesting how kind of violent or how kind of intrusive it generally becomes, but actually, like, in a strange way, like, all of these works together, like, did all sort of like somehow produce quite a very strong kind of sense of a portrait, a very strong sense of kind of an overall kind of spirit or some sort of portrait. It's quite fascinating. Right. This is basically me just signing my name over and over and over again at a distance from the canvas. But it looks a bit like someone else's signature. Love. I mean, again, like the most classic, I think one of the most classic sort of pop images of the probably ever made. I mean, and strangely, like for Robert Indiana, like the work almost like was the end of his career. He kind of made this work and got huge amounts of success from it, and then seemingly couldn't cope with the amount of success and had to kind of go into retirement. And relatively recently he passed, but in sort of like living almost as like a hermit. Who he couldn't really see people and wasn't really able to communicate with people. When he made an image like the original Love image, which is, you know, one of the most communicative kind of bits of graphic / kind of pop / kind of representational even art that you know we know. Anyway, so with this one it was rather funny because I had a conversation with a Turkish collector who rushed up to me and said, "Did you ever sell one of these works to a Turkish collector?" I said, "No, I don't think so." He said, "Good." And then he went off. I think he bought one, I think that's what he was saying, but it didn't actually make himself clear at all. And this is based on a work by Eligio Boetti, again, a 60s Arte Povera artist who worked with embroideries that he'd have made in Afghanistan, and they were written as kind of concrete tapestry / poetry. And in this case, obviously, what I realised was that Gavin Turk's kind of handy because it's got 9 letters in it, so you can make a little 9 square grid of it. Okay. Another artist from the 60s, Andre Caderet, who famously made these stripy poles, and he would broadcast when he was going to be appearing at a certain place, carrying one of these poles, and that would be a performance. He also would just turn up to someone else's exhibition with a pole, and then he put it on his CV that he'd been in that exhibition. So what I really liked about this was the idea that sculpture or art or the process of showing was simply by virtue of appearing with and carrying the pole. And here what I did was I tried to kind of amplify the work by just turning the poles into a series of bicycles. And this actually was a project that happened in Regent's Park during Freeze, where the audience were invited to cycle the bike round the park, and then they got given a certificate saying that they'd been a work of art. But I mean, they, you know, whatever. So there's that thing, the Warhol thing. Again, a series, and I have an obsession with the white transit van, the white van man, again, a kind of English cultural icon. And so I made a whole series of transit disasters with white transit vans in all sorts of compromising positions, getting burnt, crashed, thrown off the hills. I get another, so this is another bronze sculpture, so small bronze sculptures, a life-size little box of ship matches. Again, I suppose the maritime thing, it relates to a load of, I made a mechanical sailor, and I've made some lotus flowers and various stuff to do with the sort of maritime culture, again, looking at the idea of kind of the liminal space, or what contains our cultural identity, and whether this idea of sort of nautical power has and comes back into being in this on the match, and the match itself is the thing that lights the candle, is this thing that maybe lights the fire that we cast earlier on. That actually the match itself is a kind of little alchemical object. And also, like, the match itself might be something you would find on the ground. Again, a bronze cast of an apple core painted to look like an apple core. I've done a whole series of these things. So this is sort of about consciousness, and maybe it's about, you know, Eve is persuaded to try, Adam and Eve are persuaded to try the apple, and suddenly they become conscious, and the scales fall from their eyes, and suddenly they have to run around wearing fig leaves, and they have to leave the Garden of Eden. In a way, that's that sort of process of consciousness. It's that sort of moment where you come into a knowledge about something, and it's almost like stops you being naive. It stops you not knowing nothing, or knowing nothing, and somehow, like, that idea of the trompe l'oeil and the idea of maybe the apple core itself, like, is about to go on to the next phase of its life. It just at the bottom there, you can see that maybe like the pip's going to pop out of here, and another apple tree is going to be made. Figure is actually just a life-size or like a human-size rusty. It's actually bronze and then patinated with a ferric patina. This is a kind of a model that relates to a permanent sculpture that I've made in. This is one new change, so it's literally opposite St Paul's. and it's I don't know if there's another picture of it, but no, there isn't. But, so like you can stand inside this this sort of the space behind it, and you can look through and you can see St Paul's. So you've obviously got again another religious kind of thing going on with the nail and St Paul's, but you've also got the nail as a kind of like the thing that goes in the wall that you might put the paint, you might hang the painting on. The nail is a kind of point of reference. The nail almost like as a symbol of the missing space around it. Like the rusty nail was like the thing that was holding some invisible kind of big bit of wood or timber or something that was around it. Maybe that it's the idea of sight. It's like maybe like a pin in a map. It's kind of, on this scale as well, it's kind of a bit like a tree. It's kind of like that. You can do nail hugging. Large door is like L''AGED. The Golden Age is a bronze sculpture of a door. Obviously, Large Door is also like a famous film by Buñuel. Again, it's the playing with the inside and outside, the idea of the frame. Again, maybe playing with Magritte's work, like he famously has a painting of a door with a cloud coming through it, and so here's this door. It's kind of very similar to this. I'm going to go back. It's kind of in some ways it's quite similar to an egg. And we'll see later on, I've done lots of work with eggs. Like somehow, like an egg is just like one great big door. So there's this kind of wonderful sense of like being able to access the door on both sides of the door simultaneously. So you're sort of like, you're always inside and you're always outside. The door, as it happens as well, is 45 degrees open, so it's also ajar. So when it's a door, not a door, when it's ajar. Another one there. This is rather interesting because, so it's an open door, and it's done in neon. And actually, Jane has a print of this, I think. So, see Jane later. No. Basically, what I really liked about this is a neon sculpture. Obviously, it kind of promotes the door. But what I really liked about it was that in a way, like neon itself as a material is a kind of a doorway. It suggests come over here, go through here. It says open, or it's a kind of, it in of itself is made as a strange attractor. Had a conversation with a child who was like, oh, I've got to go over there and see that neon. I must go and see that neon. I must go and see it. And I'm like, why? He said, well, I'm just so attracted to neon. I can't resist it. I'm like a moth. I have to go over and see these things. But when I get there, I just feel all funny and weird and not sure I like it, which was really cool. Right? And I thought that's exactly what it's like. So it's really well explained. Ego, I, ego. We can go into that if we want. These are actually two fiberglass boys. No, two fiberglass eggs. The boys are they're just cute little twins. This was again at Frieze in the sculpture garden. We've got two separate sculptures that I have to show together. This is another sculpture that I made more recently. It's a patinated bronze egg. It's like 80 centimetres. And it's a kind of, and underneath it has this like Brancusian / kind of Indian stone plinth. This is now a bronze egg that's this is in the New Art Centre at Roche Court in Salisbury. This is a bronze cast of a plastic bottle painted to look like the bottle that I've just picked up off the street. So it's a bit sort of muddy. It's got kind of little bits of dirt all over it. And this piece was connected up to me being awarded the title the Laureate of Waste. But again, like water, the water bottle, the way that again bronze cast of this water bottle. I mean, you know, the water bottle is so amazing, isn't it? It's such a kind of a, now that plastic is so ubiquitous, like it's absolutely everywhere, and we realise that it's so cheap. It's unbelievably cheap. It's almost like it's an oil byproduct of the fuel industry, of the petrochemical industry, and literally, like, it's so hard for any other materials to come in and take its place. And yet we know we carry water in it, but this bottle is part of the process of ruining the water. You know, there's a huge irony in containing water in a thing that's going to end up destroying the water. I mean, I actually bought a glass bottle of water from the shop, and it was 90 pence. I got the special discount. Sorry about that, but I am the speaker, so it's okay. But it fascinated me really, like the glass bottle that the 90p water was in. Like, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, the amount of work, like heating up sand to make that glass. I mean, I was buying a glass bottle. I mean, you know, I did get some water as well, but you know, it was absolutely amazing. And you know, like everyone goes, oh, it's fine, glass can be recycled. How expensive is it to recycle glass? It's so much more expensive than kind of finding a tap. It really is amazing how economies have moved and shifted. And I really think it's amazing how we're moving and shifting. And I think that's one of the things when I talk about the dates, or even think about my work. Sometimes I think, wow, you know, like you know, I'm in the wrong game, or I'm almost finding it hard to look at this stuff and think about it in terms of the longevity of it. You know, I think I generally tend to make art to last. I did a series of watercolour. Again, it was a kind of Sunday painting. This idea of like the watercolour being a kind of a lower grade version of painting, but somehow more significant, more close, more personal, more associated to the hand of the artist, and then that sort of idea of the Sunday painter. No offence to anyone who only gets to do art on a Sunday, but that's okay. It's just there's an idea about watercolours where they kind of like they're obviously Prince Charles's medium of choice. And so there's a kind of, again, I think a kind of some sort of cultural snobbery about the watercolour, and obviously this is a water bottle, and it's obviously not just a water bottle now, it's a water bottle that's sort of being crushed. So not only is it been sort of used, it's then someone else has come along and sort of run it over. They sort of used it again in a way that they've basically crystallised it as a piece of rubbish, or they've kind of not seen it, or anyway, they've flattened it. And then I've been collecting the plastic bottles now. Whenever I see one on the street, I pick it up and I take it to the studio. I've got about 500 different shapes. It's quite sort of, sorry, I'm only laughing at myself, it's fine. You can if you want. So, I mean, it's kind of a bit weird. And then I started thinking, oh, well, you know, would it be possible to reframe these things? Could I put them? So basically, now what I've done is I've taken a Donald Judd sculpture, almost like a kind of a god of minimalism, of reductivism, of the cube, if you like, and I've used it as a stand, a plinth for the empty plastic bottles. And then this is the work that I've got in the gallery, the GS artist. GS artist, is that right? Yeah. And it says 2019. It has been sitting in my studio probably since 2017. But I've just had it on the side, and it hasn't really been a work of art. Somehow it was just a thing that I did. I liked it, and I couldn't sort of put it away. And then I suddenly thought, oh, actually, Jane's got is working the exhibition down the road is working on the basis of time and politics, or is it space and politics? Space and politics. Anyway, the point is that somehow it seemed that here was this kind of strange little moment of putting the chocolate wrapper into the bottle, and just it becoming a Molotov cocktail. So it becoming this kind of violent, dangerous, and kind of homemade incendiary device, which maybe is used in the process of revolution, or in the process of kind of like street battles, and then maybe this idea of the torch, the flaming torch, like the idea of sportsmen who light a torch and it sends a message around the world, and then maybe the cans, or maybe the matches. Maybe the bronze casting process, and then we've given it the title. I was going to call it Molotov cocktail, but that seemed a bit too obvious. In fact, it was called that for a bit, but I didn't really like it. So now we've got the title Firewater, which I liked even more because again, like if we go back to our first experience of strong spirits, we drink them and then we get the sensation of burning in our throats. And obviously there's actually no water there at all, it's just air and implicit water. And at one point it was going to be called, what was it? Fire, air, water, and earth. But I was searching around for the earth. And my son said, maybe you could use the glass, because obviously it comes from sand, so it could be earth, but I thought it was sketchy. And that is... that's where we stop. So, how are we doing on time? Oh, sorry. What do I want to do? I want to put it, leave it up and put it back on the... Oh, too much. That's great, yeah, that's great. I want to put this onto what I had it on before. I'm going to put it back on.
So I did mention before, I was at college with Gavin, and I also used to work in his studio for a bit. And he really is what I can only describe as like the Robin Hood of artists in some ways, because he's had obviously a very successful career, but then he's supported such an enormous amount of artists along the way, including myself. So we've all had jobs, he's fed us. I mean, it's quite amazing. So yes, thank you for that.
Sorry, I was trying to get the picture, the last picture. I shouldn't have moved off it.
Yeah, but but thank you. What were you going to say?
You get a degree.
I did actually get a degree. I didn't actually get one. It is true. I'm sure we've got lots of.
I got my BA, but I actually do have like an honorary doctorate.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't need the MA. I don't need the MA. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put our last image on the screen, because I think that looks good. I like to look at that. So it's
any questions?
Great. Okay. Good.
I'll put the other light on.
Okay. I don't know. I just skip through and I miss things out, and I start kind of talking, and it just kind of goes a bit like that. I mean, I don't really know what you guys want to hear, or you've all got different ideas about why you do art, or why you're interested in art, why you've come to hear me talk. What did you think it was going to be? But I've got a question to that.
Can you just talk a little bit about the ego piece?
Oh, you missed out on the ego.
Yeah.
The ego is quite good because it's a bit like the egg, isn't it? The egg.
It was a bit like, okay, I could talk about this, but I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I actually made 3 pieces in neon. I made a neon exhibition, and the 3 pieces were the superego, which was written in a kind of courier font, ego, and id. And the id was written in a kind of sans serif, just ID. It looked like a kind of emoticon. And obviously they come from Freud. They come from Freud's analysis or psychoanalytical work. And and that in itself, like, for me, like, reminds me of surrealism. And I think I get a lot of I keep returning to surrealism with my work, because, you know, I find that sort of the idea of the dream state, or even like even almost like the symbolic, notional idea of the dream state, I enjoy. Like the way that perhaps people don't dream about eggs, but, you know, eggs do kind of appear in surrealism. It's a sort of surrealist motif. It's almost a signature of surrealism. So if we come back to the ego thing itself, so again, like with my neons, the superego was a white neon, the ego was pink, and the id was blue, and obviously the ego, in some ways, it was about the idea of that communication with the audience. Like, so it was the suggestion of if you would entertain the idea of this work, you might do it by virtue of your ego, like that your ego that the audience's ego. And I think the idea of audience is super important within my work. I think I said it a bit before, but I do think that I make art for an audience. I'm sort of stimulated. But if I was on a desert island and I wouldn't make art. There's no one around. I wouldn't make art. I mean, I would just crawl around on all fours, and I'd sort of like, I'd fiddle around with stuff, sticks and bits and bobs, and I'd test stuff out. But I don't think anything I would do would be art per se. I mean, it may be that if a boatload of people come along to the island, there's nothing, culture, you know, they might then create my fiddling about as a kind of like some sort of indigenous art. But it would take the audience coming along in order to make it into the art and to give it in a way, the framework, the context which makes it art. So, you know, I mean, I think that's why it was very interesting, this work, because it was hovering on in a peripheral place where I had stuck the foil almost like without really thinking in the bottle, and I thought, oh, that looks good, and I left it in my studio, and I was like, I don't really know what to do with that. Does it work? Is it quality? Is that okay? I didn't really think about it at all. Actually, I just did it, and I was like, I like that, but I didn't. It got as far as that, but I didn't. It wasn't quite formed. Or I hadn't quite given it enough thought, or given it enough whatever it is that you need to give to your art. Or maybe I was nervous that, you know, it's too simple, it's too simplistic. It's like, oh, no one's going to buy that. They know they can see through it. It's empty. It's like he's just stuck a bit of foil in a bottle. Like, what's that? Why's he done that? You know.
I thought it had a bit of Icarus about it. I don't know why it sort of has a sort of and the fire thing, the sort of melting Icarus thing. Anybody got any other questions?
That was an answer.
Did you segue? I could go on the one show.
Yeah.
Can I ask a very sort of primitive kind of question? I've got to say that I'm coming from a position of having a kind of lifelong suspicion of bronze. Let's take you back to the cardboard box. What's the difference between putting a cardboard box, perhaps with a brick inside it to keep it in place, and